Hey guys, my name's Naren. I am an undergrad at UC Davis. I'm actually a first year studying biochemistry and molecular biology. I'm also pre-med, so if anyone is interested in the pre-med track, feel free to text me or just ask questions about that. But yeah, anyways, Vaishali, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be on your podcast, so let's get straight into it. Um, that's a good question. So honestly, the reason I like biochem and molecular bio, I kind of think of it like, hardware and software. Okay. So for any CS nerds who are watching out here, if you're listening to this and if I screw something up, I'm sorry in advance, but I like working with cancer and I like working with also neurological disorders. And one of the things that we study in these areas is, what genes or what proteins are involved, and alongside that, what other pathways do we need to know? What chemicals can we produce? So essentially, the biochemistry side of it is, how do we create something that can traverse through these pathways? But the molecular biology side is, these are what we know in the structures, and this is what each thing can do, and this is, how the whole cell cycle works. For instance, how do we apply what we have, you know, in our software to do something in the hardware? So it's kind of like that mix that I really kind of do appreciate. So that's why I chose biochem and molecular bio. Hmm. Nice. Hmm. And yeah, that's actually true. Actually, I was doing a piece for my job on some news from Johns Hopkins University, where they used AI and ML algorithms based on ChatGPT to actually train the Da Vinci surgical robot to perform surgical procedures. And I was actually talking to an otolaryngologist over at UC Davis Health, and he told me, AI, whether you like it or not, is going to shape every facet of healthcare in some way, shape, or form. So, especially for research or for people who are interested in healthcare, you know, I highly recommend getting your feet wet. Not you don't even have to go full on as like an AI ML engineer. Just got to know a little bit. Just know, how does AI impact my job? How can I use AI to my advantage? And what are some of the benefits and pitfalls of AI in certain things like modeling? So it's a good thing to know just a little bit about AI and ML in those aspects. Hmm. Yep. Um, it can go either way. So I've done research independently and I've done research with a mentor. And when you're doing research independently, you're in control of your whole thing. There are some things that if you're doing research in a field where, you don't really know much about, then there's a huge learning curve. And one of the research projects I'm actually doing just for fun involves educational psychology. And although I don't know much about educational psychology, I do know about the psychostatistics about it. I know all the statistics about it. But one of the things that I have to learn is, how do I apply all the data I have and how do I format it into actual readable data that actually can give results? So I have all this data, but how do I convey information through that? So that is something where there's a pretty big learning curve. And when you're doing independent research like that, you want to make sure you start and you actually learn. And it's okay to fail at times. I'm not even kidding. Last night when I was, trying to work on the project, I got so frustrated when I was trying to figure out how to do, the code on RStudio to actually represent my data set and whatnot. and figuring out every single specific test that I would need to do and doing the full write-up, it was honestly a nightmare. So sometimes it's about, how do I piece things apart? How do I separate things here and there? What am I good at? What am I not good at? It's about identifying those little things here and there and then working your way to improve your skill in them. Now, let's talk a little bit about mentored research. So, I have also done research with a mentor. I'm actually currently working at a lab at UC Davis Health right now. And the best thing about mentored research is, like you mentioned, connections. But another thing that I do like to emphasize is they actually know what they're doing and they can actually tell you a lot more than you probably could by just learning on your own. So I work in banana particle synthesis alongside just treating brain tumors with this. And one of the things that I really did not know about was, this idea called STIck, which is sequential targeting and cross-linking nanoparticles. Essentially, you kind of have a small nanoparticle, so this is where your drug will be, and then you surround that with two different types of chemicals, and then that gets surrounded by a bigger nanoparticle, which also has surface coating. And when I first learned about this, when I was at the team, I was like, oh my God, this is actually pretty cool. And I'm gonna be really honest, when I first read that paper, I had no clue what it was about. But when I kept talking to my mentor about it, and then she and I just had a lot of conversations saying, okay, this is how this works, this is how, we can apply these biochemical concepts into here, it all starts to make sense. So having a mentor is really helpful in the aspect that they can really help, make that learning curve go really quickly. Wow. Okay. So yeah, I guess the reason that I really want to go into oncology and the reason I do oncology research is I've had a lot of friends and family members, even some of my teachers, they've been diagnosed with cancer. And with that, I've known how it is, being in the room and getting the diagnosis, and you know that your life's not going to be the same forever. I know what it feels like, and I've been there. I've had people who are really, really close to me get the diagnosis. Some of them thankfully have been all right. Some of them unfortunately have passed away. But it's something that, really motivates me because it's something that I want to be, I want to be someone who sits with you and someone who's right next to you. And in your darkest hour, I want to be someone who can actually sit there with you and give you a little bit of hope and give you and say something like, there's at least one thing I can do, and I'm going to do every single thing I can do to help you as much as I can. So that's kind of right, really the big motivator for me to do my research in oncology. But another motivator that I also do have is I just love learning and I love teaching. I really just, one of my biggest goals is, I feel like science is really, really overcomplicated in general, like, between scientists, like, for example, like, if I'm reading a paper and if I have background in that area, then yeah, I can understand it. But if I give an article that I'm reading about, the blood-brain barrier to, let's say my cousin who has no experience in, neuroscience or neurobiology whatsoever, it's going to just go completely over the head. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to take complicated scientific news and complicated scientific concepts and simplify them down into something that a layman can understand, something that, anyone with just a basic level of knowledge can understand, or anyone with the time and patience can understand if they just read it through. And that's something I've actually been working on quite recently with my job at the California Aggies, so I'm pretty happy about that. Hmm. So is this only specific to my work in LNPs or across all my work? I could do all my work because I think it would be easier. LNPs would be, I like LNPs, but I've had some good mentorship, so I don't think I'd have much challenges there so far. But I could start from like, really far back. Reading a research paper from the very first time is it's one of the hardest things anyone can do. I still remember um, I was supposed to read a 10-page literature review. Three of those pages were bibliography. The first page was just a cover page. So that's what, 6 pages that I had to read, 6 pages of actual content. And it took me around 1 to 1.5 weeks to finally read the whole thing. And that's when I tried finishing it, I still couldn't understand it. I got so frustrated. I kid you not. I was so frustrated that I was like, is this really what research is? And I just started self-doubting myself a lot. And I feel like anyone who's read a research paper can actually resonate with this. They understand like, oh my God, this is horrible. But over some period of time, when you start learning more and when you actually find something that you're really interested in, reading doesn't feel like a chore. It actually feels like something, you want to learn a little bit more about. Uh, when I started, reading literature over the summer in preparation for my lab work, it took me a long time to get back into the groove of it, but when I started reading more and more about, an area that I was super interested in, I just I just had to read a lot more. It was just something I needed to do. I just needed to go find an article that's really similar or find an article that I haven't read about a topic that's really related to my field and just go, okay, how does this work with this? How does everything work with what I've learned so far? So that's one of the major challenges I had when I was starting. Um, when I'm doing research or when I'm writing stuff, there is another challenge. So I published a book, I'd like to say maybe a year ago. I'm not too sure, it's been a while, but it's essentially just a physics textbook for AP Physics 1 students. If I remember correctly, it was the only book in the market that had the new unit. So I was like the first person to do that. And one of the challenges with that was, making stuff that is, easy to understand. Like I keep talking about, making stuff, that's super complicated, easy to understand for someone who's just starting. And you might think, oh my God, you know what? I can just use ChatGPT. I can use all these tools that I have nowadays, and I could, figure out what works for me. Sure. But the thing is, what works for you might not necessarily work for everyone else. And that's one thing I've learned. I had the privilege to be a TA for my physics class in my senior year. So I taught 200 to 400 kids, and half of those kids weren't even mine. They weren't even in my class. I was teaching about 200 kids from a different class. And I can tell you that a lot of people have different ways they learn. So actually, one of my friends, when he was taking the course, he had, you know, this he had the struggle with dynamics. And so I worked with him one on one to figure out what was he good at, what was he bad at. And for him, abstracting things and making things simpler was easier. But for another classmate I had, this guy was a math genius, so he would kind of overcomplicate things. So one of the things I had to do was just say, hey, everything that you need to know is here. You don't need to think about anything else. You don't need to think about integrals. You don't need to think about derivatives. You're not in that class right now. So there's a lot of different ways that we can teach people. And one of the things that is really hard is how do I make something that is accessible for a lot of people? And that's something I'm actually still working on. It's something that not everyone can master really quickly. I'm still learning how to build that connection because in my current role, I worked with a lot of different scientists and I worked with a lot of different institutions to talk about their news and make it in a way that other people could really understand it and appreciate it. So my goal is not only just to make people understand it, but at the same time allow them to actually truly appreciate, the work that's been done and to really understand the applications of what that could be done in, other avenues. Thank you. Hmm. And honestly, one of the things, yeah, one of the things about that is I actually still do use ChatGPT, but I use it in a specific way. So rather than making ChatGPT summarize the whole thing for me, I'll read it and I'll try to understand it as much as possible. And then what I'll do is I'll copy that section, put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, this is what I think this section is trying to say. This is my complete understanding of it. Try to give like a mini lecture to ChatGPT. And then I'll tell it, hey, is whatever I said right? Is this what is correct according to what the literature says and also what past general knowledge says? And then from there, according to what the response is, I'll either fix my understanding or I'll just move on. Hmm. Hmm. Yep. What about it specifically? So what novel things have we been working on? So okay, I'll answer the first part about AI. We really don't use much AI because I mean, personally, I mean, I use AI because whenever I get a procedure from the lab, I don't like I'm one of those people who really wants to understand it. Like even though it's just like copying stuff and just putting a few reagents here and here, letting it react for some time. I actually really want to understand it. So what I'll do is I'll put it in GPT and then I'll do the thing like I just mentioned earlier. I'll say, hey, this is what I think each step does. Is this right? Is this wrong? If not, what is the real thing? So that's how we use AI. Well, that's specifically how I use AI. But in the lab, we don't really use AI that much because we're more of a biomaterials lab and nanoparticle lab, so we can't really use any technology that much. Sorry? Yeah, it's a wet lab. Yeah, so wet lab we really don't use much AI. We use a lot of computation though. So for instance, when we're doing high performance liquid chromatography, or when we're doing spectrophotometry, or whenever we're doing any different type of analysis, we use computers to make sure that we get all the data arranged nice and neat. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Um, That's definitely true. Yeah. Believe it or not, I've seen a lot of people here, like more than I would think, who are actually like non-STEM at all. Like there's this one person who was actually a poli-sci major in my chemistry class, and I think it was in her junior or senior year, she decided, you know what, I'm gonna switch 180 and I'm gonna go pre-med. So it was really nice getting to know about her story, and it definitely speaks to the fact that you could be whatever major you want to be. You just gotta do the prerequisites. That's all that matters. Hmm. Yeah. And is it still like that at Berkeley? Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Oh my God. Hmm. Yeah, it's actually funny because my high school English teacher, she sent me like this message, I think it was last night or the night before, and it was a reel about how Brown University selects their students. And so my thought on, the whole process is this. There are things I wish I kind of did, there are things I wish I didn't do. Everyone who's been through high school is going to have some regrets about, what they did in high school. But if there's one thing I'll tell you guys about, it's just, do what you really want to do. Do what really excites you. Because if you're doing a project or if you're doing something that you really don't want to do, people can tell. Um, like if you talk to me in high school, if you talk to me about like if you talk to ninth grade me about physics, I would just be like, oh my God, I hate physics. I don't even know what it is. But if you talk to 12th grade me about physics, then I would just go on a whole rant about it. So it really does depend on your interest. If you're interested in something, do it. Find a way to do it, and chances are things are actually going to happen for the best. So believe it or not, actually, a while back, I'm actually currently working on the story for the newspaper where there was this new organic chemistry technique that came out. So 100 years ago, there was this organic chemist who created this rule. It's called Brett's rule. So anyone who's been following science news, you guys know Brett's rule just got broken by a team of organic chemists at UCLA, led by Dr. Neil Garg. And for my story, I actually needed an interview, and I thought, you know what? I could probably find Dr. Garg's email, and I could probably send him an email asking for an interview. And for the longest time, I had the draft ready. I just never wanted to send it because I figured, you know what, he's probably not going to respond. But lo and behold, actually later today, I will be interviewing Dr. Garg, and we will be talking a little bit about his work. And it is the craziest thing that has probably happened to me in my career for scientific journalism. So if there's one thing I'll leave you guys with, it's anything can happen, and you never know. Just try it, and if you never know. Things could probably work out for the best. And if things don't work out for the best, you learn your lesson. You just got to move on, but keep your head up high. Thank you so much for having me. It was a